Often people look at the former Soviet countries and think about the cost from a perspective of this is cheap because the government is competing with the people and the government has state capture. Well, realistically, this is far from the truth. And when you're looking at it, the Soviet countries that used to exist may be the most capitalist in the world right now. Hello, and welcome back to the Traveling Report. Today we're going over why Soviet-era countries that used to exist are now some of the most capitalistic, and why that competition drives down cost quite substantially. And this is best seen, of course, in Georgia, but right now I'm in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, where, of course, the effect is still seen. And oftentimes, people look at these systems and they think, wow, that's really cheap, especially when it comes to healthcare. But what if I told you there is no real state healthcare? You cannot not pay and get healthcare. Well, that's the reality of these situations. That's the reality of how these countries and these places operate. When you look at the ability to pay for things here, yes, it is cheap from a Western lens, and also if you're considering it from the lens of income versus what you're paying, it's very much cheaper. You can get a full checkup in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia for $20, sometimes less, sometimes 10. And the reason why is because these systems incentivize private competition. These systems are built by having some of the most doctors in the world per capita. These systems are not publicized. And this is why the incentives are so perverse with public systems, because you get the same thing from importers negotiating prices. For instance, in Georgia, a lot of their drugs, a lot of their medications come from Ukraine. And it's with that there is no US subsidy. Most of the subsidized medication from the US comes from Austria. And a lot of the times, countries negotiate on a national scale with Austria. This creates a perverse impact on the cost of said drugs, because you're not getting the best rate, because governments do not know the market price. And so governments will inherently pay what they deem fair based on their tax base. And so it also leads to systems like Germany, where there's mandatory insurance, even though it's a public system. And while I understand the thought process that, oh, but, if someone can't afford it, isn't that a problem? It is. And in many cases, people will pay for other people who cannot. There are NGOs, there are people who support the fact that someone cannot pay. Benefits of a completely private model is that, of course, these people that are paying for you don't have to pay that much. And when you look at models in Europe, these systems are inherently flawed in a lot of ways. And especially if you look at what they are charging for, it's kind of ridiculous. On a tax level, of course. And in Poland, to hire someone, you have to pay the ZUS for their healthcare. That can be 25% of a Polish person's income, depending, of course, on who you're hiring. So you're paying 25% into a inefficient, bureaucratic system. And as an employee, you're still paying into the system. And so it creates these perverse effects, right? Where, yes, you're getting massive amounts of care for the general public. As I know a lot of Europeans are gonna talk to me in this video about how, well, there is technically a public system in Georgia. There is technically a public system in Uzbekistan, in Kyrgyzstan. Okay, go try and use it. Get citizenship and go try and use it. You'll pay more in bribes than private system. It costs more. What you get with private systems in these countries is a non-existent private system, or a public system, my apologies. When I speak on this, I'm of course not trying to drag down European countries. What I'm trying to drag down is the fact that there is no private competition in these public systems. And yes, there technically is private healthcare in, for instance, Poland or Germany, and in fact, Germany is mostly a private system. I've never had insurance in the US under my own name, as my dad has insurance, and that is passed down. I still don't have insurance, aside from insurance to travel, which costs me like $5 a year. In Asia, it is very common to say on paper you have a public system. China, Malaysia, the Philippines says it has universal healthcare. But in practice, those public healthcare systems are noticeably lacking in terms of even being able to use them. This creates a very unique system where, of course, the healthcare is based solely on market price and market principle. And if you look at the cost of medical care in the Philippines, if you look at the cost of medical care in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Thailand, whatever else, there are people that go to these countries specifically for healthcare because it is genuinely cheaper. And when these countries do end up having this medical tourism, they're still making a lot of money. The doctors aren't, lacking pay, so to speak. The people are making money, and they wouldn't be doing it if they were not. And so it creates this difference of incentives whenever you're on a pure private model. And my editor is from the Philippines, and she could probably point out that while it's not extremely cheap for her because salaries are so low, she's probably not spending as much as an American. When you look at the sets of incentives for these companies, they cannot overcharge. Because if they overcharge, and if they are unable to create value on the basis of their systems and whatever else, they are essentially going to go out of business. And this is something that not many people think about, which, of course, I've always sort of on this channel looked at systems and seen the effects of something that's deemed more contrarian. But yeah, I really like being in countries where it is solely private healthcare. And it's due to the fact that they're just more efficient, they're better quality care, there's a understanding that they need to be cheap, that they need to be timely, whereas there's a ideation that Polish people have that NFZ is extremely inefficient, and it is. And if you look, Poland is one of the better systems in terms of public healthcare. And so if Poland is still struggling, what does that say for the worser wait times, like in Canada or in the UK? That's not up to me to decide. Of course, I am just here to report on the facts of the situation. But with that said, if you like this video, feel free to like it. If you really like this video, feel free to share it with your friends. If you are looking for a way to move abroad and do what we're talking about on this channel, feel free to go down into the description, pick up a jurisdictional one-pager that I will quote you for. Without further ado, this has been the Traveling Report, signing off.